Sensationally silver, because you are.
Welcome, everyone, to Sensationally Silver, A State of Mind, conversations with extraordinary, ordinary persons of age, people who are going to bring you information, inspiration, and validation. Join us. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Sensationally Silver, A State of Mind, conversations with extraordinary, ordinary persons of age. My guest today is Alan Watt, and he coaches people in writing so that they can tell their story, they can write a screenplay, they can write a novel, they can do whatever they want. He's the one who's cheering them on. Welcome, Alan.
Hi, Robin. Thanks for having me.
Well, I'm delighted you're here. I know about Alan from my daughter because she has taken some writing courses with him and thinks the world of him. So, how did you get into doing what you do, Alan?
Well, do you mean teaching writing or being a writer?
Both. Let's hear
Oh,
about
okay.
both.
Well, I've always wanted to be a writer since I was a little kid, and I guess when I moved to Los Angeles and I started to have some success as a writer myself, my friends, people would want to give me their scripts, their works in progress. And I realized I had a real gift for giving people notes. And so I started. I opened a workshop in my dining room at my dining table on Monday nights, and it just grew and grew. And then one day I created a workshop called the 90-day novel because a lot of my students were having a lot of fun in the class, but I noticed they weren't completing their work, and I realized that when I really started to have my own success, I discovered it was because I would write my first draft quickly before I had, Stephen King talks about get your first draft down in about 90 days because it gives you enough time to get it all down without if you wait too long, you start to think and second guess. And so you want to really write from your subconscious. So I'm teaching a process of marrying the wildness of your imagination to the rigor of story structure, because I think a lot of the times writers get there's often two kinds of writing workshops. There's the one that has people do a lot of free writing, and it's great. People really begin to find their voice. And but what often happens is they end up having this 800 pages that has no shape to it. Doesn't have a beginning, a middle, and an end. But there's all this wonderful, brilliant work in there. And then they come to me and they go, I don't know what to do with this. There's the other workshop that's the sort of the standard Hollywood screenwriting workshop, which teaches story structure, but it feels like a formula. And so a lot of times people who are real artists and people who really want to tell a unique story resist this. So what I'm doing is I'm teaching people how to trust their subconscious. And you don't have to, there's nothing formulaic about story structure. Unfortunately, it's often taught by story analysts who teach it like that. And so I'm teaching people how to marry the wildness of their imagination, the rigorous structure, to tell the story that they've always wanted to tell.
So, Alan, now you tell me if I'm wrong because I very well could be. It seems to me that there are very different processes involved in writing. That one is, as you're saying, the creative process, but there's this other part that's, I would call the editor. And if that editor gets too busy jumping in and saying, no, don't say it this way, say it that way, or that's not correct, you bring to a halt the creative flow. Am I making that up or is that?
You're not making that. That's absolutely correct. And so it's funny because the very first exercise that I have my writers do in the 90-day novel and the 90-day memoir workshop is something I call the fear exercise. And it's just simply this, right? For 5 minutes, I'm afraid to write this story because, and this is to address the editor. So what I really want people to understand is that your fears are not something that you need to get rid of. 'Cause I know a lot of you, when you're watching this, you're like, oh no, I've got all these fears, and they're sort of in the back of your mind, and they're these hobgoblins that sort of, you don't say, oh, I'm never going to write. You say, oh, I'll write eventually. I'll write one day, maybe one day when these fears sort of diminish. Well, the fears aren't going away. But here's the thing is that you can actually make your fears an ally. Now, here's what I mean by this. And if anybody is at home, you can do this exercise right now. Spend 5 minutes and list all the fears that come to you. I'm afraid to write this story because oh my God, people are going to see what a kook I am. People are going to be offended by what I write. I'm going to make myself too vulnerable. It's going to suck. Or I can't tell you how many people write, it's going to suck. It's going to sell a lot of copies and it's going to change my life. And then I have to deal with that. So a lot of times our fears are actually contradictory, which is great. Now, what you'll do is you'll notice that the fears you have in writing your story are identical in nature to the fears that your protagonist has in the story. In other words, you are going to discover that you're uniquely qualified to write your story because of your fears.
Wow, that is such a different concept that you bring that to the table. That's where it comes from.
You bring all of yourself
Okay.
to the table, everything, because the irony is that when you do this exercise, you're going to notice 5 minutes later that you just put the raw truth on the page. That's what we're all looking for. That's what makes your story universally relatable.
It's what people want to hear. They want to hear the honesty. They don't want to hear something that's just sort of formulaic and put together and goes A, B, C, D. They want to hear something where they go, oh, I know that's true. Maybe I know
Right.
that's true personally. That's true for me too. This person
Yes.
gets it. Yeah.
Imagine if you're sitting in a workshop and somebody says, I just wrote something, but I'm absolutely terrified to share it. Everyone in the workshop leans forward and goes, tell us more. You now have all of our attention, right?
Right. Exactly.
And so this is the place that we want to be willing to write from now. This is where you want to make sure when you do your writing, you've got to approach it like it's a two-tiered process. The first tier is I am writing this for myself, and I don't ever have to show it to anybody. Just imagine how your subconscious goes, oh, thank God. Imagine if you're in the result while you're writing your first draft, how stressful that is. It's such a burden on your subconscious that you're constantly going to be having the editor. So our brain is good at doing one thing. Our brain is really good at solving problems. It's really good at uh, answering the questions we ask it. Do you understand what I mean by solving? So like but this is what happens when we start to get scared. We go, "Oh my God, why is writing so hard for me?" And then your brain goes, "Well, it's because you had a terrible childhood or you had a great childhood or blah 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 blah." So the key to getting your first draft down is giving your left brain, your logical brain, better questions to ask itself. And so what I do is in the workshops, I work with a lot of stream of consciousness writing exercises and something I call the story structure questions. And they keep your left brain busy so that your right brain, your subconscious, which is the seat of your genius, can really explore. And it becomes this very joyful, thrilling process. Fear is really just energy. And when you reframe your relationship to fear, it actually becomes this very exciting thing. It's just like flipping a switch. And so what feels terrifying when you get out of the result and get into the process actually opens up all of this energy and you start to get very excited about the story that wants to be told through you. You actually feel like your cheeks start to get a little warm. I can't believe I'm writing this, but I don't have to show it to anybody. And then what happens kind of miraculously is at the end of this process, you become transformed as a result of the process. And that thing that you thought you could never show to anybody, you're suddenly like, wait a second, I actually have a new relationship to these events, and maybe I'm okay sharing them.
So the fear becomes the fuel, the energy
Yeah,
that fires this process.
that's
You make
exactly.
friends with your truth, and
Yeah,
then maybe you think, maybe somebody else could benefit from this too, or I can show this. This is
yeah,
real. This is part of me. This is truth with a capital T.
that's right.
Right.
Yeah,
So this audience, Alan, is well, we're aimed at, this program is aimed at persons who are mature, persons who are 60 or over.
right.
What special things do you have to say to them, or do they have to offer in this whole area of writing, personal writing?
Well, that's a great question. I mean, what they've got is a whole life of experience. And I think it's really important to understand that writing is, we live in a culture, we live in a society that sort of wants to kind of objectify or codify everything. And so, like, everything seems to have this cost benefit analysis. Like, oh my God, what if I write and it doesn't sell? That's not a very kind question to ask yourself, because the desire to write, I think, is really the desire to evolve by resolving something we're seeking to understand. And so I don't want to objectify the creative experience. I think that we are creative beings. And I think that being creative, I mean, think about it. Isn't it something that gives you a lot of joy and satisfaction and provides meaning for your life? Why would I want to restrict that to, it would sort of be like looking at a child and you give them one chance to walk. Well, you didn't walk, so that's it. Oh, you didn't sell your first book, so well, you're done. If we approach creativity like it's a daily practice, we're going to get better and better at it. And so that's the first thing. I'm not directly answering your question, but but if you really have a great desire to be creative, the first thing is to give yourself permission to put on the training wheels and just get started.
Just go for it no matter what.
That's it. Go for it. Have fun with it. And then sometimes what begins as an avocation can remain an avocation, or it can become a vocation. But that is far less important than I really think that the thrill of creation needs to be the reward. And when it becomes the reward, you become more inclined to tell a truth that's going to be of value to others.
Once upon a time, Alan, I had a life-threatening illness, and my life was saved by surgery. And I joined a group briefly that was made up of people who had survived the same sort of thing, but everyone else in the group had had cancer.
Mm,
So they were all cancer survivors. My situation wasn't like that, but
right.
mine was pretty desperate too. So here we are in this group. And one night, the woman asked everybody in the group to talk about something they'd always wanted to do, what they really, really wanted to do. Every person in the group said they wanted to write,
Hmm.
and no one had written.
Mm,
And I think that what I learned from that experience was that one of the things that guides us in life sometimes is the desire to get out of here when we go without having made an idiot of ourselves, without having embarrassed ourselves, to
yeah,
just get out without, feeling like this,
you got it.
which is
Yeah.
very sad because
It's
as we
very
get
sad.
older, Who
Yep.
cares? I mean,
Who
what's to
cares?
lose? What's to lose?
That is one of the great gifts of getting older is we care less and less. Hopefully, I know for me, as I get older, there's this part of me that's like, it certainly wasn't my intention to hurt their feelings. You ever know that sometimes people's feelings get hurt, and we haven't, our intention wasn't to hurt their feelings. But what are you going to do? So yeah, absolutely. I think this is, and here's the thing. Do I have to wait for a life-threatening illness in order to move in the direction of my dreams?
To take the brakes off. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Or what if my bottom doesn't have to be that low? What if I can just sort of connect to that divine discontent of, you know what, I've always wanted to do this. I'm just going to get started. I'm just going to start. I'm going to write one sentence today. I'm going to take 5 minutes and just write and notice what that does to you. Notice how it shifts you in some really subtle but real way. And you go, wait a second, maybe it's okay for me to express something, you know?
Take my turn to say what I have to say, to put
Yeah.
it down and make it real.
Don't die with the music inside you.
Yeah, yeah. So, older students, tell me some stories about some of the students you've had that aren't kids anymore. They're
Yeah.
real, real, real grown up.
I can tell you many stories, and I didn't know you were gonna ask this, but just off the top of my head, the first one that jumped into my head was this. One of my students came into my class. This was years ago, and she was homeless. She was living in her car, and she started working with, and she had this incredible spirit, and she was a chef. She was an executive chef for, celebrities, famous people in Hollywood. And she had hit on hard times. But I watched in the course of just a few months, I watched her, she started telling, she was writing her memoir. And her memoir began with this crisis moment where she was going to drive her car into a wall because she was so full of shame about where she was, and by reframing her relationship to that and by her beginning to recognize her inherent power, her truth, she started to realize that all of this shame didn't belong to her. It belonged to the circumstances that when she was a child that far preceded this event. And she suddenly came back one week and she said, I just started taking tango lessons. And she was giddy like a child. And she said, and I met this guy and I sent my resume out. And the next thing I knew, within weeks of like, she'd been in the class for like about 2 months. And within weeks of that, she was she got a job cooking for, I'm not going to say who it was, but one of the biggest rock stars in Los Angeles. And he wears a big hat and he plays guitar. Anyway, she was making six figures from like boom, from like zero to 100. And but that was sort of secondary. That is a result of her beginning to value herself. Does that make sense? So like I don't go out and go, I want to make a lot of money. I start to recognize my truth, my true value. When I do that, I'm willing to put my resume out to somebody. So I really believe that our writing, ultimately is nothing more than a byproduct of our spiritual growth.
That makes so much sense to me.
Yeah.
And it sounds like with this woman, she had to kind of remake friends with herself and who she was. And that happened through this process of beginning to talk to herself on paper or in the computer or
Yes.
whatever it is.
She was this extraordinary person who had not written before, but her gift was her willingness to tell her truth on the page. And it turned out she was just a wonderful storyteller. And the reason I think I'm remembering this is because she just texted me a couple of weeks ago asking if I would write the foreword for her memoir that's being published. So she years later she has sold her memoir, and I think it's with Hay House that it's coming out.
So there's a success story.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, there's lots of them, and I will tell you that I hesitate even to say this because my focus is not on the result, and so I have an unusually high success rate with my writers because we don't talk about the result. We stay in the process and we stay in the real work of getting to the truth. And I help people structure their story. A lot of workshops don't teach writers how to structure and have a catharsis at the end and have a beginning, a middle, and an end. And but that's what makes a story really compelling. It's not just the prose. We don't need to just go from sentence to sentence. That's wonderful. And there's a lot of wonderful prose stylists. But a lot of people who are great prose stylists still struggle with how to tell a story where the whole becomes greater than the sum of its parts.
I so agree. I do a lot of reading, and
Yeah,
sometimes I'll read an entire book that is beautifully written. But
right.
when it gets to the end of the book, the end of the last page, I'm not happy with the story because it didn't move me. It didn't have any kind of inspiration in it, even though sentence by sentence, it was beautifully put together.
Right.
So we love stories because they
Mhm.
take us on a journey. There's
That's right.
that beginning, there's the conflict, and finally there's some kind of resolution that we go, ah,
That's
okay.
it.
So that's part of what you teach, Alan. You help corral those talents for speaking, writing into the journey that takes whoever's there as part of it, the writer or the reader or the viewer or whatever, from the beginning to the end in a satisfying way. Yeah.
Yes, that's right. Because story really is about the completion of a theme. And so if all that happens in somebody's story is that the protagonist gets what they want, our reader will be disappointed. If all that happened in It's a Wonderful Life was that George Bailey left Bedford Falls so he could have a wonderful life, we would be disappointed. We don't want him to leave. We want him to reframe his relationship to what having a wonderful life means. And that's what story is about. Story is about reframing our relationship to our primal desire.
So I'm
Very,
just getting what you're saying, Alan. You're helping people discover that about themselves, and that
yeah.
helps them write the story that they can write, right?
That's exactly right. And that's the work because as I think I said, our story comes to us as an invitation to let go of a limiting belief that we have about ourselves or the world. That's why our story comes in. So when our idea comes to us, we get really excited by it, only to realize at some point in the process, oh my God, this story is forcing me to see my situation, whether it's fictional or real life, in a new way. It's forcing me to see it in a new way. And that's where the work really begins.
I find myself wanting to ask you about maybe who's been your oldest student
My oldest student, do you mean the oldest
in age?
uh
In age, yeah.
God, that's a really you mean what was their age?
You can be general. It doesn't have to be down to the month.
I mean, I can think of a number of students who've been in their late 80s. I'm trying to think of any in their 90s, and I'm sure there have been. They're just not coming to me off the top of my head.
So it's never too late to begin this process.
Oh
You
no.
don't have to worry about, oh my gosh, I'm going to run out of time before I run out of story, right?
Yeah, no, no, you don't. This is the most democratic art form because you need a pen and a piece of paper.
Yeah.
Doesn't cost anything. And you can just do it right where you are. You can, now I'm aging myself because I'm saying pen and piece of paper. Obviously, most people probably have laptops. I write my first drafts longhand. I just find it, more just I don't feel like anybody's going to be reading this, and I can just prop myself up in bed and just scribble away, and I feel like I'm more inclined to get to the truth that way. So
I agree. That's how I write too. I
is
get the
it?
big yellow legal tablets and I
That's
just
it.
write, but I have to get somebody else to type. And that's sometimes a bit challenging. But
Yeah,
yeah, there's something about that brain and hand connection that's
that's right.
right where you are. You're not
Mhm.
translating through another medium somehow. Yeah, yeah.
And they have done studies that the hand to mind connection is actually more it connects us to the truth a little more easily than typing.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
It also has been my experience when I've been writing that I go into a place that is quite separate from time. It's
Hmm.
it's it's kind of an altered state, and
Yeah.
it's not easy to get in there, but once I'm in there, I do not want to come out. I don't even think about coming out. I just want to
Yes.
stay and keep doing what I'm doing. And the only thing that stops me is that there are other demands on me that put a
Right.
limit to that. But it's a wonderful state to be in, that creative state. Doesn't
That's
mean
a
everything I'm writing is so wonderful, but being in it is kind of an end in itself. It's precious to enter.
that's where I totally agree with you. And that I think that's why I always say we're not the author, we're the channel. And when you're in that state, there's something very humbling about being an artist because we start to realize that we're actually co-creating with this mysterious force that I don't quite understand. But I really believe that the universe wants us to be creative. And that when we make an agreement with our subconscious to express ourselves, the stars align in some way in order to support us. Like, have you ever had that experience of you start working on something and then suddenly some these synchronistic things start to happen, like, oh gosh, I can't remember that thing that happened, and then you get a phone call and it's that person who's like, hey, remember that thing that happened? Or it can be anything. It could be in the going to the grocery store and you're like, you hear you hear something that actually you go, oh, that's the voice of my protagonist, or that's something. And so when we tune in to our story, the universe starts to tune in with us as well, and it starts to give us things that we weren't even aware that we knew.
So, Alan, if they're still with us, anybody who's thinking, I have never been able to write, I'm not good at spelling, I've never been able to do any of this, do people who think they have absolutely no skill at this still, can they still do it? Or is that just
Yes.
not an option? Yes, yes.
Absolutely. So first of all, in the first draft, we don't care about we don't concern ourselves with grammar, spelling, syntax, the quality of the prose. One of my friends is just the most astonishingly beautiful prose writer, and he tells me my first drafts, the prose is a 2 out of 10, and then I do another pass and it becomes a 4 or 5, and then another, and so it's something that you work and work, but what we really care about is your story. And that's where the focus needs to go. Just tell your story and don't concern yourself with anything else. And the fact is that you don't even worry about like chapter endings or how long a chapter should be. Just keep going. In my 90-day novel workshops, the first month is just spent doing stream of consciousness writing exercises. We don't even start writing the first draft until week 5, day 29. And that's because you've imagined the world, you've allowed an outline to emerge, and now you've got a basic confidence in the story that wants to be told. But yeah, the confidence is not a prerequisite, thank God, to being an artist. You don't need to be confident, you just need to be curious about your lack of confidence.
And maybe willing to take a
And
chance.
willing. Oh, absolutely. If you're not willing, you're not going to do it, and that's okay. When I'll have some people, I'll have some writers sometimes, they'll be in such despair and they'll go, I don't think I'm a writer. I don't know if I really want to do this. And I'll say, the great news is that you don't have to. And the irony is that when we give ourselves permission to not do it, we begin to connect to why we want to. Sometimes we're scared and we're like, we get into the result but just give yourself permission to not do it and then see what happens because that'll immediately connect you to your higher self. No, 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 I still want to do it. And I know I was just scared and I'm afraid that, my agent or my publisher, or whatever, or the world's not going to like it. But that's not the reason we're writing.
Give us the reason we're writing. Tell
Well,
us.
the reason that the desire to write is the desire to evolve, to understand, to find meaning. I think the unexamined life is not worth living. And so the desire to write is connected to examining something, some aspect of our, collective humanity, something that makes us curious. That's why I just love writers and artists so much because they're so curious.
So it's a process of discovery. Let's see what comes
Yeah.
out. Let's see what
Yeah.
emerges. Let's
Yeah.
see at a deeper level who I am.
Yeah.
Yeah. What I
You
have to
know,
say.
I had a guy email me once, and he was a writer in my class, and he said I give up. He wrote to me, I give up. I don't think yeah, I'm not a writer. And I wrote back, I'm jealous. I wish I could give up. And he was like, oh, thanks a lot. That's not very helpful. I was like, well, you don't have to do this. You really don't. Nobody is going, hey, where's your pages? Nobody's doing that. Nobody cares if you write or don't write.
It makes me, this may sound like the oddest analogy, but I remember somebody who was a shrink once saying to me that sometimes the thought that you can kill yourself is the only thing that keeps you going. Yeah.
Yeah, I can leave this pain.
Yeah. I don't
He's
have
like,
to do this. Okay.
no,
I'll
I
do
don't
it
have
for
to
one
do
more
this.
day. Yeah.
That's right. And that's the irony is because sometimes if a and by the way, he came right back and he was like, ah, all right, all right. And we laughed about it. But I'm just saying, like, there's a part of me that if I didn't have to write, if I really didn't have to write, I might not be writing. I'm doing it because there's a big part of me that has to do this.
Yes. And I think that's true for people who are true writers. They
True
must
writers.
write. They must write. I only write when I have something to say that I think
That's it.
everybody needs to hear. And I don't always have that. But
That's
I've
right.
known people who are what I would consider real writers, and it's not a choice for them. They've got to do it. They
Got to
have
do
to
it.
write.
Yeah. When I don't write, I get grumpy.
Mhm.
I need to write.
That's really something to think about. So all of you who have joined us today, because we need to stop for now, but I hope you've gotten a different perspective, perhaps, on what writing really is and maybe why you should just let yourself do it, not
Mm.
let yourself stop this process that is so inherent in human beings, this storytelling gift that we all have. Because, Alan, it sounds like you're saying if you can talk, you can write. If you have any
That's
ability with words, you've got it. That's all you need. Go.
if you possess a pen and paper, you can write. If you can print, you can write.
Okay. So just to close, Alan, what's your final thought that you want to share with people who have joined us today? What do you have to say to them?
Well, I guess picking up on what you just said is, you know, I don't, it's not my job to teach or to convince somebody that they want to write. In fact, I'd almost be more inclined to do the opposite. If you don't feel like you need to write, then don't bother. If you're happy and content without writing, for God's sakes, why jinx it? But if you do feel a creative impulse, if you do feel called to express yourself in some way, then ask yourself, what's that thing standing between myself and expressing my truth? And maybe you want to start with that first exercise. I'm afraid to write because, and look at what you just wrote and consider giving yourself permission to write and not show it to anybody. I know that makes no sense because it seems like, well, if I write, I should be, if I don't, if a tree falls in the forest and doesn't make does it make a sound? It seems like somebody has to listen to it in order to make a sound. What if you're the one that needs to listen to it?
So this is a gift we can give ourselves.
That's
Whatever
it.
else happens, we don't know because that's part of the journey. Yeah.
And when you start to give yourself a gift, you just want more.
Yeah. Yeah. You want to keep opening it.
Stories about self-love. That's the last thing I wanted to say.
Mm.
The Every single story, even if it's a tragedy, it's about the cost of not choosing self-love. But every story in one way or another is your theme is manifests as self-love.
And that's not a selfish thing. That's necessary to have any kind of joy in life. There has
That's
to
it.
be this deep regard for ourselves. And
Yeah.
sometimes we don't learn that until we're well advanced in our life. It comes
Yeah.
late to a lot of us. But
Yeah.
oh, what a precious thing to get.
No
Alan,
kidding.
thank you so much for being my guest today.
Thank
I
you.
think you've probably inspired a lot of people to take out that pen and paper and play with it. Because
Yeah.
that's really what it is. Play with it. This isn't life and death. This is play.
It's play. It was
Yeah.
just get in the sandbox and I'm mixing my metaphors and start writing.
I love it. Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. And
Thanks
thank
for
you.
having me.
Oh, my pleasure. And thank you, all of you who have joined us today. Come back next time. Great news, everybody. Our premier hair care product line, Sensationally Silver, is now available on Amazon. You can order it so easily, you can get it so quickly, and you can be so sensationally silver.
Sensationally silver.